The rain came suddenly soft at first, then sharp and insistent, as if the sky itself had been waiting for just the right moment to release its sorrow. On the cobbled streets of Hazel Ridge, a town so quiet it sometimes felt like time had forgotten it, people ducked under awnings and rushed into cafes. But she didn't run. She stood there in the center of the street, eyes closed, hair damp, hands slightly raised as if asking the clouds to wash something away. Her name was Clara Whitmore, and she had just quit her job. After 5 years of giving everything she had to a marketing firm that barely noticed when she worked late, skipped weekends, and lost pieces of herself to deadlines, she'd finally walked out. No dramatic speech, no big scene. Just a quiet, "I'm done," and the soft click of a door closing behind her. Clara had come back to Hazel Ridge, the town where her grandmother raised her to breathe again, to remember who she was before she became who the world wanted. And now, soaked through and standing in the middle of Main Street like a woman set free, she laughed softly. That's when he saw her, from the glass storefront of Page and Whistle. A cozy bookshop tucked between a florist and an antique store, Elliot High leaned forward, brows raised. His customers were used to seeing him in his usual perch behind the counter, nose in a novel, hands inked with pen marks. But today, he was frozen by the sight outside, a woman in a navy coat, her shoes kicked off, twirling slowly in the rain. Like a forgotten melody. Should we help her? An elderly woman at the counter whispered with a chuckle. Elliot smiled. I don't think she wants saving. I think she just wants to feel alive. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped. Outside, Clara opened her eyes, startled, and met his gaze. He wasn't what she expected, a bookstore owner with soft eyes, tousled brown hair, and the kind of presence that felt like a pause in the noise. You'll catch a cold, he said, offering her a wide plaid umbrella. I think I needed this. More than I needed to stay dry, she replied, her voice quiet but sure. He didn't hand her the umbrella. Instead, he opened it and stood beside her, holding it over both their heads. The sudden closeness made her breath catch. For a second, they were just two strangers under a makeshift shelter, hearts strangely in sync. I'm Elliot, he said after a beat, his smile slightly crooked, like he hadn't used it in a while. Clara. Well, Clara, he glanced at her bare feet. You have a very poetic way of walking into town. She laughed, and something about the sound made him want to hear it again. I just moved back, she explained, trying to start over. He nodded. Starting over is a specialty of mine. Bookstore therapy, he gestured to the cozy shop behind them, is highly underrated. Is that where people go when they forget who they are? He tilted his head thoughtfully. That, or when they want to become someone new. The rain slowed to a drizzle. They stood for a moment longer, neither quite ready to step away. He began, then paused, suddenly shy. Maybe like a cup of tea? Or coffee if you're on the rebellious side. She tilted her head. Tea, definitely, and only if it comes with stories. Elliot grinned. That's the only kind we serve. The bookstore smelled of old paper, cinnamon candles, and lavender. Clara was instantly at home. As she sat near the window, wrapped in a knitted blanket Elliot offered her, he moved behind the counter, making tea like it was an art. You live above the shop? She asked, watching him pour water into two mismatched mugs. He nodded. Inherited it from my grandfather. He was a poet. The kind who believe stories save lives, do they? She asked, genuinely. He looked at her, more serious now. Sometimes they don't just save us. They remind us we're worth saving. Something in his tone struck her deeply, as if he'd once needed saving too. They talked for over an hour, about everything and nothing. Clara told him about the city, her burnout, and how she missed the feeling of creating something real. He shared stories about growing up surrounded by books about the customers who came for novels and left with new beginnings. There were silences, but none of them were awkward. Just peaceful. By the time she stood to leave, the rain had stopped. The sky outside had turned a soft shade of lavender gray, like the promise of something better. Elliot walked her to the door. "You'll come back, right?" he asked, rubbing the back of his neck. Clara smiled. "That depends. On? On whether your tea is always served with kind eyes and good conversation," he chuckled. "Only for certain customers." She stepped outside, the air now fresh and cool against her skin. As she turned to walk away, she heard him call out, "Clara?" She turned. "You don't have to figure it all out today. Sometimes enough is just showing up." Her heart fluttered, not from what he said, but how he said it, because for the first time in a long time, she believed it. Clara Whitmore hadn't planned on returning to Hazel Ridge. The town, with its winding tree-lined streets and storybook charm, had always felt like a safe memory, not a future. After her grandmother passed away, Clara moved to the city to chase success, believing ambition would quiet the ache inside her. But in chasing everything, she'd lost herself. The fast pace, the constant noise, the way her ideas were stolen and her worth tied to performance, it hollowed her out. Clara found herself back in the creaky old cottage at the edge of Larkspur Lane, the one with ivy climbing the porch and wind chimes singing with every breeze. Her grandmother's spirit lingered in the lace curtains and tea-stained bookshelves. It was quiet here, sometimes painfully so. But she needed it. In the mornings, Clara walked barefoot through dew-covered grass, her fingers brushing the wildflowers growing freely along the fence. She made tea in the chipped porcelain teapot her grandmother once swore healed heartbreaks. And in the afternoons, she sat at the little writing desk by the window, staring at a blank notebook, wondering if she still had words left to give the world. For the first time in years, she wasn't anyone's assistant, strategist, or fixer. She was just Clara, and that terrified her. Elliot Hawley was the kind of man who made people feel seen without trying. He'd spent most of his life watching others come and go. Tourists, locals, dreamers, passing through Hazel Ridge on their way to bigger things. He never begrudged them. In fact, he often helped them find the books that made them brave enough to leave. But he stayed. After his grandfather passed away 5 years ago, Elliot inherited Page and Whistle, the bookstore with windows that breathed in sunlight and stories. At first, he thought he'd fix it up and sell it. But something in the scent of old books and the rhythm of the place spoke to him. It became his world, his refuge. He lived in a small apartment above the store, a space filled with dog-eared poetry books, plants and chipped mugs, and a notebook he hadn't opened in years. He used to write once, before everything fell apart, before life reminded him how fragile dreams could be. Elliot wasn't lonely, not really. But some nights, as he sat by the window with his tea growing cold, he'd imagine what it might feel like to share the silence with someone who understood it. Hazel Ridge was the kind of town that noticed everything and said little. The people here weren't nosy, just lovingly curious. And when word spread that Clara Whitmore was back, more than a few hearts quietly cheered. Everyone remembered her as the sweet girl who used to draw birds in the margins of her school books, the one who held her grandmother's hand through illness. With grace beyond her years, Clara hadn't expected anyone to remember her, let alone welcome her with kindness. Mrs. Albright, the florist, left her a bouquet of fresh lily on her porch with a note that read, "In case you need beauty on hard days." Mr. Dawson, the grocer, refused to let her pay for her first basket of apples, saying, "Your grandmother saved my wife's roses from dying once. We owe you." It was these small moments, these gentle acknowledgments, that reminded Clara she belonged somewhere. In the days following their first meeting, Clara returned to page and whistle more than she planned. Sometimes she browsed books. Other times she simply sat in the window seat, sipping tea while Elliot read quietly nearby. He never asked for more than she could give, and that, somehow, gave her the freedom to give more. They didn't talk about anything grand or life-altering at first. Their conversations were filled with quotes from favorite books, memories of rainy day adventures, or funny anecdotes about the odd customers that wandered into the shop. But beneath the lightness, something deeper stirred one afternoon as Golden light painted the bookshelves. Clara asked, "Why don't you write anymore?" Elliot looked at her, startled. She shrugged. "You talk like someone who writes. I can hear it in your words." He hesitated. "I used to write poetry, stories. I thought I'd publish someday. What happened? My world fell apart. And I convinced myself words weren't enough to hold it together." Clara said nothing, but her eyes told him she understood. Meanwhile, Clara began sketching again. Nothing polished, just quick outlines in the margins of her notebooks. Birds, windows, the way sunlight filtered through leaves. It wasn't about impressing anyone anymore. It was about feeling again. Elliot noticed, of course. He saw how her fingers moved across paper like they were remembering an old rhythm. He never asked to see her sketches, but one day, he left a small tin of colored pencils on her seat with a sticky note. For the moments when black and white isn't enough. That's how they were gentle nudges, quiet encouragements, and slowly, without realizing it, they began to build something. Outside their connection, life went on. Clara started volunteering at the town's community art center, helping children express themselves through painting and stories. The kids adored her, and for the first time, Clara saw her reflection in the eyes of others, not as someone who needed fixing, but as someone who inspired. Elliot, too, found new joy. Inspired by Clara's courage to start again, he began writing. Again in secret. At night, after the shop closed, he'd sit with a pen and notebook, scribbling poems about wildflowers, second chances, and the girl who walked into his life with rain in her hair and hope in her eyes. Hazel Ridge was healing. Them both quietly, steadily. Clara no longer counted her worth and deadlines. Elliot no longer feared the stories inside him. And every shared look, every simple moment between them, made their worlds feel a little less lonely. One day, as Clara helped him rearrange a stack of books, her hand brushed his. She looked up, and something unspoken passed between them. Neither of them moved away. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be yet," she whispered. Elliot's voice was gentle. "Maybe you don't need to know yet. Maybe you just need someone to remind you that you already are enough." Her heart ached at the simplicity of it. No one had ever said that to her, but he did, and she believed him. It began with moments small, almost unnoticeable at first. The way Clara lingered longer near the bookstore window. The way Elliot's eyes searched for her in the crowd at his Ridge's Saturday market. It wasn't dramatic or sweeping. It was slow, gentle, like two souls remembering something they hadn't realized they'd forgotten. Clara found herself wandering into page and whistle more often, sometimes with a purpose, dropping off homemade blueberry muffins or new flower sketches for the community board, but mostly without one. She liked the way it felt inside. Like time moved slower there, like her heart didn't have to beat so loudly. Elliot noticed every time. He noticed the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was shy. The way she chewed on her lower lip when she concentrated. The way her laugh, the real one, not the polite one, lit up the corners of the room. He'd catch himself staring sometimes, forgetting the book in his hands or the customer waiting at the register. One rainy afternoon, Clara arrived just as Elliot was closing the shop early. A storm was rolling in, thunder soft in the distance. "You have impeccable timing," he said, unlocking the door again just for her. She stepped inside, wind-tossed and flushed. I brought soup. He blinked. You brought soup? Lentil and carrot, she said, holding up a thermos and two small ceramic bowls. I thought you might forget to eat. He laughed. You think very highly of my cooking habits. Clara grinned. I think very highly of you. The words slipped out before she could take them back. A blush crept up her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Elliot didn't either. Something in his gaze softened. They sat on the floor behind the front counter, sipping soup and watching the rain through the glass. The thunder came closer, but neither moved. Clara leaned her head against a stack of novels. I used to be afraid of storms. And now? I think I just needed someone to sit through them with me. Elliot didn't answer. Instead, he reached over and gently took her hand in his. His fingers were warm, grounding. And in that moment, Clara felt something in her heart shift. The tension between them grew like sunlight through morning fog, subtle but undeniable dot at the Hazel Ridge Harvest Festival. They worked a bookstall together. Clara wore a hand-knitted scarf and painted little bookmarks for children who stopped by. Elliot handed out paperbacks with warm cider and told stories about each book. Like it was a friend he was introducing. Clara watched him with awe. He made people feel seen. Not just listened to, but understood. You're really good at this, she said as they packed up. Elliot glanced at her. At what? At being kind. He smiled, but didn't speak. Instead, as they walked toward her car, he reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was simple, tender, but it made Clara's heart stumble in her chest. One evening, Elliot invited her upstairs to his apartment for dinner. It wasn't fancy pasta with too much garlic and salad he'd Googled at the last minute, but it felt like the beginning of something important. They ate on the floor beside the fireplace, surrounded by flickering candles and the scent of old books. At some point, Clara picked up his notebook. You're writing again, she said softly. He stiffened slightly but nodded. Mostly nonsense. Can I read one? He hesitated, then handed her a page. It was a short poem, raw, honest, about finding light in unexpected places. Her eyes watered as she finished it. This isn't nonsense, she whispered. It's about you, he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. Instead, she reached over and rested her hand against his heart. You see me in ways I've never seen myself. He leaned forward, just a little, but didn't kiss her. Not yet. Instead, their foreheads touched. And in that sacred closeness, it felt like everything unsaid between them was finally heard. They didn't label what they were, but there were signs. The way Elliot always brewed her favorite tea before she arrived. The way Clara left little notes in the books she borrowed, quotes about courage, about healing, about love. The way their hands always seemed to find each other when they walked down the street. One Sunday morning, they walked through the Hazel Ridge woods. The sun filtered through orange and gold leaves, and their laughter echoed like music between the trees. Clara stopped beside a small pond and turned to him. I used to think love had to be loud, dramatic, the kind of thing that shakes the world. Elliot took her hand, and now I think it's this. Quiet, safe, gentle. Elliot smiled. Love isn't always thunder. Sometimes it's just a hand reaching out in the dark. And hers was already in his, but still. They hadn't crossed that invisible line, the one between friendship and something more. Maybe because both were afraid to name it. Maybe because what they had was too precious to risk, but hearts don't stay silent forever. And theirs had already begun to speak. Clara hadn't expected. Love to feel like this. It wasn't grand declarations or candlelit violin serenades. It was Elliot handing her a book before she even asked for it, knowing she'd need the comfort. It was him standing beside her when she presented her first children's art class, even though he was terrified of glitter. It was her remembering he liked his coffee with just a hint of cinnamon and leaving it by the register without saying a word. It was the quiet that lived between them, comfortable, constant, and more intimate than anything Clara had ever known. One crisp November morning, Clara invited Elliot to the cottage for breakfast. The sun spilled through gauzy curtains, bathing the kitchen in gold. She wore a paint-streaked apron and made pancakes in the shape of hearts and suns in unspoken metaphor, perhaps for how he made her feel. I thought I was bad at mornings, he said, watching her. Clara smiled, flipping a pancake with a flourish. Maybe you just needed a better reason to wake up. They ate at the small wooden table her grandmother once filled with family stories and warm casseroles. Now it held something new, something blossoming. I've never felt this. At peace before, Elliot admitted. Clara looked at him softly. You deserve peace, Elliot. So do you. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. And just like that, something passed between them again, not rushed, not uncertain. Just real. That morning, they didn't rush anywhere. They moved slowly, lingered over coffee, sat on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the world drift by. They didn't need to speak. Their hearts were already speaking for them. In the following weeks, their bond deepened. They spent lazy Sunday mornings browsing antique stores, laughing over forgotten teacups and dusty love letters. They stargazed from Elliot's rooftop, lying side by side in silence, fingers intertwined. Clara whispered dreams she hadn't voiced in years, writing a children's book, building a life surrounded by art and love, and never again measuring her worth by someone else's expectations. Elliot listened like her dreams were sacred scripture. He, in turn, opened pieces of himself that had long been buried. He talked about his mother's death when he was 12, the reason he first turned to poetry. He shared how his grandfather raised him with books and stories when words were the only healing balm they had. How he once fell in love in college, only to have his heart shattered so quietly no one even knew it broke. Clara placed her hand on his and said, "You don't have to be broken for people to love you." His eyes glistened. "You see too much of me," he said. "That's not possible." One evening, after a book club gathering at the store, Clara stayed behind to help Elliot clean up. They moved around each other with ease, music playing softly in the background. As she wiped the counter, he stood behind her, silent for a moment. Then, Clara. She turned and found him closer than usual. His gaze held hers, searching, gentle, reverent. "Can I kiss you?" The question, spoken like a promise. Clara nodded, heart thudding like thunder in her chest. The kiss was slow, deep, unhurried, like a sunrise after years of night. When they pulled apart, neither said anything. There was no need. Their silence was full of understanding. That night, Elliot walked her home in the cool starlit dark. As they stood at her front door, he pulled her gently to his chest and held her there. Wrapped in his arms. Clara whispered against his shirt, "What if this is just a moment?" Elliot kissed the top of her head. "Then I'll make it 1,000 moments until it becomes always." They didn't fall in love in a single leap. They fell in glances and gestures, in shared memories and whispered hopes. Elliot framed one of Clara's sketches and hung it in the bookstore. Clara wrote him a letter on handmade paper, a letter that simply said, "Thank you for making me believe that I was never too much, never too little, just enough." Elliot carried that letter in his coat pocket. Always. One snowy day in December, Clara brought her manuscript to him. "I did it," she said, placing the stack of papers in his hands. "A children's book about a girl who learns that even broken wings can still fly." Elliot opened the cover, and on the dedication page, it read, "For the boy who saw my wings before I did." He looked up at her, eyes full. "I'm proud of you," he said. She stepped closer, brushing snow from his coat. I'm proud of you, too, for starting again. Their lips met again, this time outside, under falling snow. Beneath the twinkling lights of the town, they both thought they'd only ever passed through. It was love, and it was real. Love. Even the gentle was kind, isn't immune to fear. Clara and Elliot had built something tender, slow, steady, quietly beautiful. But when two people bring their pasts into something so fragile, there are bound to be tremors. It started with an invitation. Clara received an email from a prestigious children's publisher in New York. They had seen early illustrations she posted mine and were interested in her manuscript, her story about the girl with broken wings. The opportunity of a lifetime. Clara sat frozen at her kitchen table, reading the message over and over. The kind of dream she'd never dared voice aloud was suddenly real, but so was Hazel Ridge. So was Elliot. Later that evening, when she told him, he smiled, a smile too calm to be real. That's amazing, Clara. You've worked so hard for this. I haven't said yes. You should. There was a pause between them. A quiet pause that used to feel full of safety suddenly felt full of space. What if I don't want to leave? She whispered, then don't. Elliot replied too quickly. But this is my dream. Then go, he said, standing. Don't stay for me. Why does it have to be either or? Elliot ran a hand through his hair. Because I've done this before, Clara. I've loved someone who left. And I swore I'd never ask anyone to stay again. She felt his walls rising. Not angry, afraid. Deeply afraid, and she was too. For days, the rhythm between them changed. Their conversations became shorter. Smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. Even the comfort of shared silence felt off. Elliot withdrew into his writing, avoiding her gaze when she visited the store. Clara stayed up late sketching, unable to put color on paper when everything inside her felt gray. Hazel Ridge was home. But so was the version of herself she'd always dreamed of becoming, and that version stood on a distant city skyline she wasn't sure she had the courage to face alone. One afternoon, Clara found Elliot sitting alone at the bookstore, the lights dimmed, rain tapping gently at the windows. Can we talk? She asked. He looked up, eyes tired. I'm sorry. For what? For making you feel like your dream is something you should apologize for? Clara moved closer. I'm not sorry for dreaming. But I'm sorry I didn't include you in it. He stood, reaching for her hand, but hesitated. I don't want to be the reason you stay, and I don't know how to be the reason you go either. Tears filled her eyes. I don't want to leave you behind. But you might have to, he whispered, and maybe I need to learn how to let people go without falling apart. The days that followed were heavy with unspoken words. Clara told the publisher she needed time. They gave her 2 weeks. 2 weeks to decide between a life she imagined and the love she hadn't meant to find. Elliot, in turn, distanced himself. He convinced himself he was giving her space. But really, he was scared that if he held on too tightly, he'd only hurt more when she left. They didn't fall apart in a fiery storm. They unraveled slowly through missed calls, hesitant glances, polite goodnights instead of kisses. It was Mrs. Linden, the elderly florist across from the bookstore, who finally said what Clara couldn't. He looks like a man trying not to drown, she told Clara, placing a soft bouquet of gardenias in her hands. And you look like a girl afraid of choosing herself. Clara blinked back tears. What if choosing myself means losing him? Mrs. Linden smiled. Then maybe it's not about choosing one or the other. Maybe it's about learning how to carry both. That night, Clara sat on her porch and wrote Elliot a letter. You once told me love wasn't thunder. It was quiet, safe, gentle. But sometimes love has to be brave too. Sometimes it has to weather storms and not just wait for them to pass. Don't know what the right answer is. I just know that if I leave without you knowing how deeply I love you, I'll never forgive myself. She slid the letter under the door of his apartment and waited. Elliot stood in the quiet of his bookstore long after closing, the letter in his hand, now soft at the edges from how many times he had unfolded it. Clara's words echoed in his mind, not dramatic, not desperate, just honest. The kind of truth that makes you ache. He had always been the one who held back, afraid that love meant loss, that opening his heart meant it could be left behind. But Clara didn't ask him to chase her. She only asked him to know that what they had mattered. Know that love didn't have to be a chain or a compromise. It could be a bridge. She wasn't asking him to stop her from going. She was asking if he would still love her if she did. That night, Elliot didn't sleep. He reread her letter again and again. By morning, he knew love wasn't just holding someone close. Sometimes it was holding their hand and walking beside them into the unknown. Clara was packing when she heard a knock at the cottage door. She opened it to find Elliot, wind in his hair, eyes soft, a leather-bound journal in his hand. "You once asked me why I never publish my poetry," he said. She nodded. He held out the journal. "This is why. Because I was waiting for the final poem. And now I have it." Clara opened the book. On the last page, written Elliot's unmistakable handwriting, was a single line. "She loved me at my quietest, and in her silence I heard." Forever. Tears sprang to her eyes. "Elliot," he took her hands. "Go to New York, Clara. Chase every dream. Paint the sky with your story. But know this, I'm not letting you go alone. I want to be in every chapter, even if I have to." Turn the page with trembling hands. Clara laughed through her tears. "What about Hazel Ridge, your bookstore? Your whole life is here. My life was stuck here until you." He smiled. "I can write anywhere. Sell books in a corner cafe or on park benches if I have to. Home isn't the place anymore. It's you." In the days that followed, the decision was no longer a question. It was a shared promise. They didn't have all the answers. Clara's book deal would take time. Elliot needed to prepare to lease the store or find someone to manage it. But there was no longer a divide between their futures. They had woven their lives into a single story. One evening before Clara's flight, they returned to the hill overlooking Hazel Ridge, the one where they'd first watched the stars. Clara leaned into Elliot's side. "Are you scared?" He exhaled. "Terrified. Me too. But I'm more afraid of waking up one day without you in my life." She smiled and kissed his cheek. "Then we're brave, together." On the morning she left, the entire town came to the station. Mrs. Linden with her flowers, the kids from her art classes holding tiny cards, and Sam from the coffee shop with a cup labeled for the artist who made this town brighter. Elliot stood beside Clara on the platform. As the train approached, he didn't look away. He just took her hands in his. "I want every version of you," he whispered. "Even the one chasing the stars. And I want every version of you." She whispered back, "Even the one who was afraid." When the doors opened, Clara hesitated. "This is really happening." "Yes," Elliot said, smiling. "And I'll be right behind you." She kissed him, not goodbye, but see you soon. The first snow of winter dusted the rooftops of New York like powdered sugar. And in a quiet little corner of Brooklyn, a bookstore cafe buzzed softly with life. Children giggled from a cozy reading nook under a tree of paper lanterns. Adults sipped coffee beside shelves lined with secondhand novels and local poetry. In the back, beneath the skylight dripping with warm afternoon sun, Clara sat at a table signing copies of her newly published children's book, The Girl with the Painted Wings. On the dedication page, it still read, "For the boy who saw my wings." Before I did. Clara looked up from her signing and smiled at the man leaning against the bookshelf. Arms crossed, eyes soft with pride. Elliot. He wore a navy scarf she had knitted last winter and held 2 mugs of cinnamon coffee, hers with a splash of cream, just the way she liked it. Your line's longer than the one for the croissants, he teased, setting the mug beside her. She grinned. They just want to see the illustrations. He leaned down, kissed the top of her head. No, they want to see you. After Clara's moved to New York, Elliot followed 4 months later. Not in a whirlwind, but with steady steps. He found a small apartment near the river, started teaching creative writing workshops in the evenings, and with Clara's help, they opened Stone Story, a bookshop cafe designed to feel like Hazelridge had followed them, warm wood, hanging plants, and a bell above the door that rang with a familiar jingle. They didn't try to recreate what they had. They simply built something new with the same hands, the same hearts that spurn. They returned to Hazelridge to visit Dot. Mrs. Linden greeted them with a bouquet of pink peonies and happy tears. The town threw them a small welcome-back picnic under the old oak tree. Clara gifted her students illustrated bookmarks and told them stories about chasing dreams. Elliot read one of his poems aloud at the town square's open mic night, the same one he once only whispered into notebooks. When they left again, it wasn't with sadness, but with peace. Hazelridge would always be part of their story, but so would everything ahead. One quiet evening back in Brooklyn, Clara stood on the balcony of their apartment, wrapped in a sweater, watching the snowfall. Elliot stepped behind her, slipping his arms around her waist. "You remember the first time I held your hand?" he asked. Of course, she smiled. "You were shaking." "I wasn't sure if I deserved you." She turned to face him. "And now," he touched her cheek gently, "now I know I do. Because you loved me before I was ready, and you waited for me to believe I was enough." Her eyes filled with tears, the happy kind. "I still love you," she whispered. "Every day, every version of you." He kissed her, soft and slow. "And I still choose you." Later that night, Clara found a small velvet box on her pillow. Inside was a simple silver ring etched with a single word: enough. Epilogue. Clara's second book launched to glowing reviews. Elliot published his first poetry collection. They traveled to bookstores and schools across the country, hand in hand, sharing stories, not just on paper, but in every smile they gave to each other, and every night when they returned home. Whether in a hotel room or their cozy apartment with books on every surface and coffee mugs never fully put away, they'd sit together on the couch, her feet tucked under his, and read in quiet, because the truest kind of love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper that stays with you for the rest of your life, just like his voice that first day when he looked at her and said, "You are enough." And finally she believed it.